Thank you, Madam Speaker. Every one of us in this chamber has seen the toll that addiction, trafficking, and exploitation take on our communities. I've spoken with first responders who arrive at the same overdoses night after night. I've met with outreach workers stretched to the breaking point and volunteers who keep showing up because no one else will. So I want to begin by recognizing what this bill is trying to do to help those community frontline services that are carrying the heaviest load in the fight against crime and addiction. That is the goal every member can respect. But good intentions alone don't make good law. And as we look more closely at Bill C-238, we have to ask whether it actually delivers on its promise, or whether it simply adds another layer of process to a justice system already overburdened and under-resourced. Section 738 of the Criminal Code already lets judges order restitution for losses to victims or organizations. That provision is there. It is tested and it works, sadly, only to a degree. Restitution has been part of Canada's Criminal Code since its inception in 1892. But the reality is that Canadian statistics suggest restitution is rarely ordered. A recent study from Stats Canada confirmed that a mere 1.6% of all cases tried in adult criminal courts that produced a guilty verdict resulted in restitution orders. Bill C-238 adds process, not capability. Our justice system doesn't need another procedural loop. It needs resources and efficiency to use tools it already has. When we start writing duplicate laws for things already covered, we do not make justice stronger, we make it slower and weak. Case in point, Canadian courts are still suffering from lengthy delays suffered as a consequence of the pandemic. The bill only applies to drug and human trafficking offenses. But if the principle is that communities deserve restitution for the cost of crime, why single out only those two categories? Moreover, if the member for Sudbury was fully concerned on the devastating impacts those two categories have to this country, you would only conclude she would be equally concerned about prosecuting and sentencing these offenders to real brick and mortar jails. She can't do this because she and every member of her government and party voted in favor of Bill C-5, which repealed mandatory minimum penalties for human trafficking and all Controlled Drugs and Substances Act offenses, which now opens up the availability of conditional sentences, also known as house arrest, which is patently absurd as the majority of those offenses are often conducted in the offender's home. Communities also absorb costs from organized theft, gang violence, and sexual exploitation. Victim services offices, police, and shelters respond to all of them. This bill draws an arbitrary line that can't be justified in principle or policy. If it's fairness we want, this approach achieves the opposite. Now let's talk about how this would actually work in a courtroom. To issue one of these new restitution orders, a judge would need clear proof that a specific organization suffered a measurable loss because of a particular offender. That's an extremely high bar, Madam Speaker. Take an overdose, for example. Which trafficker's case caused the hospital's expense for treatment or overtime staffing? These are broad social costs that accumulate across dozens of incidents and multiple offenders. You cannot effectively trace them to one person's conviction. Even if you could, community organizations would have to present detailed financial records, expense sheets, invoices, staff hours, supply logs to show that their loss was readily ascertainable, language in the member's bill. Most shelters and nonprofits simply do not have the existing accounting systems to generate that kind of documentation. Instead of helping, it drags them into court, wasting scarce time and resources. Suppose a court somehow gets through all of that and issues an order for tens of thousands of dollars. Then what? The reality is that most offenders in trafficking and drug cases have no money, assets, or no ability to pay restitution. Many are already facing lengthy custodial sentences. These restitution orders would sit uncollected, symbolic, unenforceable, and meaningless to the organizations they were meant to help. It creates the illusion of accountability, justice on paper, not in practice. Our courts are under enormous pressure. Sentencing hearings are complex enough. Judges must weigh aggravating factors, review the evidence, and consider pre-sentence reports. This bill would graft a new financial hearing into that process. Judges would have to review expense records and hear testimony about causation and costs. Prosecutors would have to gather accounting evidence and call witnesses. Defense counsel, of course, would be entitled to challenge every figure and witness. What we end up are longer hearings, more adjournments, and greater backlog. The people waiting for justice would wait even longer, and for all restitution orders that in most cases would never be collected. The administrative burden doesn't stop with the courts. Shelters, treatment centers, and first responder agencies would need to track and document every cost tied to specific offenses. That means new record-keeping systems, new paperwork, and probably new staff to manage. Perhaps the most concerning effect of Bill C-238 is the false expectation it creates. It suggests to communities that offenders will somehow pay back the social costs of crime. That is simply not realistic. We all want accountability, but accountability means consequences that can actually be enforced. It means restitution that can actually be paid. This bill offers neither. We owe it to Canadians to be honest. The way to help frontline services isn't through theoretical restitution orders. It's through real, predictive funding and effective enforcement against the people who caused the harm in the first place. So what is a better approach? Madam Speaker, Conservatives believe in accountability that works. That also means real consequences. That's why every member on this side of the House voted against the repeal of Bill C-5. We believe in laws that can be enforced and that deliver real outcomes for victims and communities. If the goal was to strengthen support for frontline organizations, there are better, proven ways to do it. To invest directly in victim services and treatment programs instead of routing support through uncollectible court orders. Ensure stronger enforcement against organized trafficking networks so that the real criminals, the ones profiting from misery, face meaningful sentences. And that is often the most difficult aspect of policing. They're always trying to get the larger fish in the pond, those who are organizing the street traffickers. It's always a give and take with law enforcement trying to find those who actually organize the criminal enterprise. We need to modernize restitution enforcement so that when courts do issue orders, they are actually collected. Right now, a restitution order ordered by the court, victims do have a process, but it's through the civil courts, and it is often faced with uncertainty, delays, lengthy costs, again, trying to squeeze that orange for a drop of juice from an individual who likely has absolutely zero assets and zero means to pay. We need to support first responders and community staff with dedicated mental health funding. These are practical, targeted solutions that deliver results, not rhetoric. Madam Speaker, the principle behind the bill is sincere, but sincerity alone does not make sound policy. At its core, it's unenforceable and burdensome. It asks courts to do the impossible, and it risks diverting energy and resources away from the very real victims and communities it seeks to help. Justice should be swift, fair, and effective. It should focus on outcomes that can be delivered, not aspirations that cannot. We owe it to Canadians to pursue policies that make communities safer and victims stronger. Not more paperwork, not longer trials, and not promises we can't keep. For all of these reasons, regrettably, I cannot support this bill. Thank you.